Welcome to the Seeing Red podcast with Andy Turner and Garrett Fools, checking up on Texas policies and politics with some federal issues thrown in, like the assault weapons ban, interest rate hikes, you get it, but it's mostly Texas, since we can't ignore the big stuff either. And now, here are your hosts, Andy Turner and Garrett Fools.
Hey everybody, welcome back to this week's episode of Seeing Red. We're glad to have you, and we so appreciate you joining us. I'm Andy Turner, and with Garrett Fools, we hope to be covering whatever you're talking about in Texas news. We have new episodes that drop every Wednesday morning with 2 new topics every week. Don't forget, you can reach out to us with any comments on existing episodes or suggestions for what you'd like to hear about at seeingredpodcast.com or via email at hosts@seeingredpodcast.com. I promise you'll get a personal response and not some automated responder. We love hearing from you all, so keep those notes coming. We've integrated a lot of what you guys have suggested, and we appreciate it. You can follow us on social media on Twitter at the Seeing Red Pod, and on Facebook at facebook.com/the Seeing Red Pod. As always, we'd like to thank our fabulous producer, the Zipmeister, for helping us put the show together and getting it out there for you to enjoy. All that said, on with the show.
Thanks, Andy. This has been a crazy week with the culmination and finality of the Paxton impeachment trial. I am just have so many thoughts and feelings about this. I really thought that the Senate Republicans would have seen it the same way that I saw the evidence being laid out, but obviously they didn't, and that's how our system's supposed to work. They're supposed to look at the evidence, make their decision, and then render it, and I respect it 100%. I'm glad that we have an elected official back in the helm of the Attorney General's office to lay out to go fight the Joe Biden administration. I'm glad that it's been resolved. If I were a senator, I believe I probably would have voted for impeachment. And I qualify it with probablys because I wasn't a senator, so I read the exhibits, I read the motions, I looked at the investigation, I sought outside interpretations of things because I wasn't a juror. If I was a juror, I would have refrained from doing that, and that would have made me see the trial proceedings differently. I don't know how my own interpretation would have differed. So I don't want to speak ill of any of the Republicans that voted differently than I would have. I think that the House managers certainly overstated their case in the media beforehand, saying it'd be 10 times worse than what was in the investigation. It was what was in the investigation. They didn't really add anything new. So I think they kind of overpromised and underdelivered, and I think that probably influenced the jury to a certain degree.
And here's the thing. So let's go back. Okay, let's go back for a minute. I think a lot of people, at least a lot of people on, X, formerly known as Twitter. I feel like we're talking about Prince here, but on Twitter are, the House should never have impeached him. I don't think people understand what impeachment means. I think they think it means that the House found him guilty. That is not the case. Let me say that again. That is not the case. The question before the House members was, the House General Investigating Committee came after hours of testimony and some documentation and whatever else, brought forward a recommendation to the full House of Representatives to impeach. And so it is the Senate's job at that point to then have a trial where the House impeachment managers present their side and General Paxton presents his side. And the bar was beyond a reasonable doubt. The bar was incredibly high. The House was never going to win unless they had a smoking gun or 1,000 pages where it was clear. And until I understood that, I was still on the fence about which way this was going to go. Did it look good for Paxton? Does it look good? Does it make Paxton look good? No, it doesn't make Paxton look good. But I got to say, it doesn't make him look good. That's a fact. So I know you had some thoughts on the process, and in fact, you wrote an op-ed not about the process, but about what was going to happen as a result of this trial. Garrett, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I had an op-ed published in the Houston Chronicle. It's the very first time something I've written has my byline on it. I've written probably hundreds of op-eds, or at least op-eds that have been published over hundreds of times, in papers from the Wall Street Journal down to the Paducah Times. I decided, since I'm not employed in Texas right now, my clients are out of state, I wanted to articulate a point that hadn't been said to that point in anywhere publicly from a conservative Christian point of view. I wrote the op-ed because it was the right thing to do, because we've been hearing about the process from Ken Paxton's side. I never heard any defense against the charges. Never heard a denial of the charges. I only heard process argument, which is fine in a legal case, but this was a political trial. And I want an attorney general who's above reproach. I think the chief law enforcement officer in the state of Texas should be someone whom, when justice is served, no one will point to him and say, well, he's a crook
Okay,
too.
so 2 points I want to make. I do not care who has an affair. That is between you and your spouse.
I care if it's my wife. I don't care if it's anybody else.
Right. But outside of your house, my house, I don't care. That had nothing to do with it. However, when you are using state resources inappropriately, in any way, inappropriately, and we talked about this a couple episodes ago, Garrett, I was brought up in politics that, the yellow line that is ethics is over there, and you stay 10 feet away from it because the appearance of impropriety is the same as the impropriety. And to my mind, I have a problem when the highest law enforcement official is accused of violating ethics.
Credibly accused.
He should be.
I think we should differentiate real quick. I think we should credibly accused. The people leveling the accusations were 7 or 8, depending on how you want to count it, of the most conservative people in this state when it comes to their actual bona fides and who they are and what they've done. That's why Ken Paxton hired them, because Ken Paxton is politically a very conservative person. So when they said that you have violated this ethics to the point where we have to go public, that gives me pause and makes me say, no, we should look at this. That said, every politician, every single one, will be accused of being homosexual, of having an affair, and of being corrupt. Every single one. And being a tyrant.
And the only one of those that matters is if you are ethically challenged or corrupt. Because who you love or what goes on between you and your spouse is nobody's business.
I think we're in trouble as a party.
I mean, civil war has been declared in the Austin State House. There is no question in my mind. I know you said you read it somewhere. I have not seen it, but it was like almost immediately
I wrote it
upon signing the document.
I wrote it. I didn't just read it. I also wrote it, but I had acknowledged that the Luke Macias, who's of the West Texas crew, had made an argument that it was already, or that it was going to happen. I made the argument that it already had. But yes, I didn't just read it. I did write it.
Either way. Yeah. And it was going to happen whether Ken Paxton won or whether he lost.
Yes.
Whether he was impeached or not. And the problem is, and again, I blame Chairman Matt Rinaldi for this, is that he took sides on something that was basically Republican on Republican. And you don't get involved if you are a good political party leader, whether you're the county leader or the RPT chair. You don't get involved in primaries. You don't get involved in, Republican on Republican impeachment processes. You stand up for all who believe in smaller, more efficient government and less taxes. Beyond that, there are more things. There's 2A, there's social issues, there's this and that and the other thing. But at its core, if you believe in those simple concepts, smaller, more efficient government, less taxes, Matt Rinaldi's business is standing up for everybody who believes in those 3 bullet points. And he didn't do that.
I would say it a different way. I think that the Republican Party, and probably the Democrat Party too, I just haven't looked into it as much, have relied on this notion of a detailed plank platform for their party system for over a century, or centuries in some cases. That's how we write our platform. Let me pull it out real quick. I should have it at hand. There were 273 party planks that were voted on. I think a few of them got cast down. There are 10 principles. There are 10 principles.
Right, but those are... Now, hold on. Those are principles and planks and platforms that are voted on by the counties, and then they're sent up to the RPT and they're voted on. I'm talking about the inherent difference between a Democrat and a Republican.
We need to completely get away from the idea of a platform. I do not think that the party should take specific line item positions on a given issue in the manner in which we do it. I think we should have principles, well thought out, more of a constitution. I do not think that we need to have 291, whatever it was, 270 some odd party planks. If you go through it, some of the stuff is about political issues from the 90s that have just never been taken out. You have all of these things in there that, okay, no one can read it. No one outside of the people who attend the meeting care. We need to be a party of principles, not a party of planks. And I don't...
Well, and taking this back to where we started, yes, we should be the principled party. Absolutely. But Matt Rinaldi inserting himself in this would be like him getting involved in a primary and saying, this Republican, not that Republican. No. You represent everybody. He still has a responsibility to represent all Republicans and gain more seats. And when he's picking and choosing, like he did in this impeachment process, he's alienating part of the Republican base in Texas. So there's a whole quantity of people who have now been just told to, F off. And Matt Rinaldi is basically saying to the entire Republican electorate, if you don't agree with me, you are not good enough. And you know what? No.
We should make something really crystal clear, though. And this is the reason why this fight is so personal and so important. These quote-unquote rhino politicians and these quote-unquote true patriot politicians, neither of them could win elections without the other. Because we are a coalition government. We do not agree on certain tactics, on certain issues, whatever the case may be. There are disagreements. Like there is in any group, but there are disagreements. We are a coalition group. If we split, the Democrats win. Neither of us want that. So begrudgingly, whoever wins the primary is ultimately who we all end up supporting. That's the way the system in America works. There are some places where the coalitions form after an election, like Britain. Similar system, but the coalitions technically form after an election. Our coalitions form and kind of stay the same, and some groups move around between parties or back into independent or whatever over the years. Let me put it this way. There is an anti-left coalition that makes up what is the Republican Party. We are against statism. We are against government control of the economy. And we are against violations of core interpersonal and familial relationships. And that's effectively what it boils down to. We can talk about limited government. That's a positive way of putting it. But we're really against government control. We can talk about freedom, but really we're talking about being against tyranny. So where
are the calls for party unity now?
Oh, there's calls for it, but there's calls for supplicating and taking on our view. And the problem is we need to have a way to have a civil conversation about these issues. But the way Rinaldi and his crew are at least talking about with the rhetoric of how they deal with it is they get one victory, one battle that they win, and they say that everyone needs to agree with us on everything. And this is what my problem is. It's kind of to the point where I'm saying they open their mouth and Democrat talking points come out. If a Republican were to give the speech that Busby gave, which he's not a Republican, or he may be now, but he's the former Democratic chair of the Galveston County Democratic Party from when Bush was a Republican governor and president. And if you were to give that speech 25 years ago, you'd think he was a Democrat. He's giving Democrat talking points. When you talk about everyone has to do what we say now because we won an election that we bought and paid for with millions of dollars of text messages and phone calls and generating of whatever, you may be putting on the veneer of conservatism, but you are making Democrat talking.
I have no patience for Republican leadership who is seeking retribution for this business of, we're going to call for an audit and we're going to hold the House responsible. And almost immediately somebody came out and said, oh, we're going to replace this particular legislator with this other guy because we won. And you know what? You don't know. That's something you do quietly. We need to be together as a party. The impeachment is over. You should have a positive message and move on.
Well, the impeachment is over right into the heart of the primary season. So we're not going to have that kumbaya until about June of next year. So we are in for 9 months of hating each other, spiting each other, saying terrible things about each other, making it personal, the whisper campaigns, the outright lies, the truths that get mixed into it where people can't figure out the difference. We are in for the worst campaign cycle Republicans have had to go through in this state, and probably since 2014. When every statewide was flipping.
It's just a shame.
And it's a shame, but this is the most important primary for the direction of the party that we've had since 2014. And everyone is starting to pick up on it. And it seems to me like the West Texas Incorporated, so this Texas Scorecard, Defend Texas Liberty, these groups these groups that depend on them, True Texas Project, Grassroots America, We the People, these groups are better organized together in that they have a coherent message that they put out as a strategy. They don't have a lot of numbers when it comes to the population of the Republican Party, the people who actually turn out to vote. They do have a lot of numbers of people who show up to county and state election or executive committees. They have people who show up to the conventions. They have people who show up to the meetings. They create a pretty good echo chamber around their politicians, and they're able to get that way, and they're able to push their agenda. And more power to them for doing that. That's a very effective communications and public affairs strategy, and I don't begrudge them their use of the tactics. There's nothing wrong or anything immoral about the tactics that they use in that regard. I will say that the tactics they use to piss people off are immoral, because they make faux outrage over issues that are either made up or completely misrepresented. But it's politics. You can only bitch about that so much before you just have to beat them the right way.
So I think what we're both trying to say is, at Seeing Red, we would mandate that, stop with the retribution. I mean, we heard the threats before the impeachment trial and this and that and the other thing. Stop. You won. Be gracious in your victory and move forward. Bring the Republican Party together, because otherwise we're not going to gain seats. The more we bicker and argue, and threats are made and accusations without proof are being made, and I'm just done. I'm done. We need to come together. This was a divisive issue. A lot of people in the House said, you know what? Yeah, this needs to be looked at. That was all that vote was. It wasn't, individual members may have had their own opinions, but all the House question was, do you think this is enough to send over to the Senate? That's it. Do you think there's enough hinkiness? I don't know what you want to call it, to send over to the Senate.
I think that they voted on the evidence that was able to be gathered in an investigation, which isn't necessarily the evidence that's allowed to be presented in a court. And I think that when you look at the fact that Dan Patrick did not require Ken Paxton to testify, he did not require the mistress to testify, he did not ask the Nate Paul to testify. These people were not allowed to testify because they were going to assert a Fifth Amendment right. He allowed them to plead the Fifth, and that testimony wasn't required to come in. But like you said earlier, we don't know if this was a civil trial or a criminal trial, and the rules were kind of a mix mash of both, and they ended up being able to benefit to the defense. So maybe that's the right way to handle it, but there was no precedent for Patrick to pull from, and he ended up pulling from the one that helped Paxton more often than not. He did not require Ken Patrick to get on the stand and plead the Fifth. He did not require his mistress to get on the stand and plead the Fifth. And he did not allow for certain evidence to come in that almost certainly would have in a civil trial, but may not have in a criminal trial. So basically, it was if the prosecution had to, in order to get their evidence in, they had to overcome a criminal standard. And in order for the defense to get something in, they only had to overcome a civil standard. So ultimately, there were a lot of objections that just wouldn't have flown anywhere, but those things that kind of fell in between those two standards ended up benefiting the defense. And Dan Patrick, I believe, made an extraordinarily large error in judgment by accepting a $1 million donation and a $2 million loan from Defend Texas Liberty and that crew of people in the 2-week time period in June after the articles of impeachment were filed, because those people were the largest cheerleaders for Paxton's acquittal, and taking $3 million in campaign funds from them can only cloud thing. And it was a huge error in judgment, especially after, at the conclusion of the trial, Patrick venomously excoriating the House and its process. Now, there were criticisms within that excoriation that are notable and are probably correct, in that this process should not be secretive. The defense has probably always been right about the House process. I do believe that initial investigations should be remained secret, because otherwise, as a political operative, you would just file ethical complaints against everybody, and then you could just say there's an ethical complaint, and look, there's an ethical complaint. That's kind of old hat. That happens in any place where that can happen. But on an impeachment inquiry, once the investigation committee has reached a conclusion that it should move forward, there should begin a secondary public investigation in which there should be some laying out of facts or evidence by the person who's opposed to it. And then if it should move forward, there should be some sort of mechanism there. On the flip side, the lieutenant governor should not be the presiding officer of the court. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick was a sports bar owner and a sports newscaster, and then a political newscaster. He's a media personality and a business owner, which are fine requirements, and he's done a great job as lieutenant governor. I'm not speaking ill of those qualities, but they are not the qualities you need in a presiding officer of an impeachment court. We need a jurist. But he did have
sitting next to him. Remember how he said he was going to have someone to take over for part of the case, and
the rules allowed for it, but I don't think he said he was ever going to do it.
No, he actually did say. So originally he'd gotten some former Supreme Court, and I'm sorry, I don't know who it was, and then they realized that there was a problem, and ethically they couldn't preside. So we found somebody else, and I've forgotten her name, but she literally was sitting next to him the entire trial. Because I asked the same question of some people qualified to answer that question, and I don't want to say who, but very, very, very qualified to answer that question. And she actually was sitting there. And once I knew who that was, because I didn't know if that was like staff or, just a contract attorney or who it was. And no, this is somebody who knows their stuff. So I think to wind this stuff up, Garrett, I think what we want to leave everybody who's listening with is you're going to read a lot of rhetoric. You're going to read a lot of hate. We need to go forward and say, no. Ken Paxton has been acquitted. Business is done on the impeachment. We need to move forward as a party, or we are not going to gain the seats in the House and the Senate that we need to gain. The Democrats seek to divide us at every freaking opportunity. And if you don't think they're not going to exploit this, if we don't come together, retribution has no place here. It's done. It's the impeachment is done. It's over. We need to come together. And I realize that that's not going to happen in a day, but it needs to happen in a month. Get over it. Move on. However you feel. If you're happy about it, that he prevailed in the impeachment, great. Good for you. I think that's terrific. But we need to move on. Like, we've got races to keep looking forward. We've got races to win. And if you're mad that he was acquitted, okay, be mad for a minute. Take a minute, be mad. And then, in a week from now, move forward. We've got races to win. We've got people, we will lose seats if we are not looking forward now.
I think it's a good place to kind of end it, but I will say that we're going to start talking about next week. We're going to start talking about the implications of this trial with the special session that the governor's going to call, and how that's going to impact the votes for the school choice and vouchers. And Andy, everyone's talking about how pissed off the Republicans are, but the Democrats are going to be pissed off too. And I don't know if they're going to get the same support for the voucher program that they had in the regular session as they're going to get in the special session. I don't think much is going to happen in the special session ultimately. There will be a motion to vacate the chair for the Speaker of the House, so that'll be interesting to see how that goes. I think Brian Harrison is angling to run for Speaker of the House. And I think that, well, I know he is. I mean,
yeah, he's all but said it. I mean,
he's
all but said the words.
That's going to be another fight. I think we are in a time where there is going to be absolute carnage within the party, and there's going to be a lot. So join us next week, and I appreciate everyone joining in.
I have all the thoughts on school choice. So as a former educator and as a woman with a master's degree in education and my experience with children, I will be sharing all my thoughts. So, anyway, you were saying, Garrett.
Well, that was it. Thank y'all for joining, and we appreciate y'all coming in. Andy?
Thank you so much for tuning in and for all of your support. We really can't do this without you. Let us know what you thought of this week's show. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Tell us why. We love our fans, and we do answer all of our email personally. We've already incorporated some fantastic ideas for topics that came from other listeners and subscribers. So keep those comments coming. We need to hear from you to know what you want to hear about. You can email us your comments or opinions at hosts@seeingredpodcast.com, or just go to our webpage, seeingredpodcast.com. There's a form right there, and it'll act like an email, and we will respond. We always answer them personally, so we look forward to hearing from you as to what you like and what you don't like. Also, you can follow us on social media. On Twitter, we're at the Seeing Red Pod, and on Facebook, you can find us at facebook.com/the Seeing Red Pod. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.
You've been listening to the Seeing Red podcast. It's always Texas politics and beyond. We present the facts and opinions. The Seeing Red podcast with your host, Andy Turner and Garrett Fools. Thank you, and tune in next week. And please do us a favor. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode.